welcome back. And we're with William Whitecloud. And William, before the break, you were telling us about you being trampled by the hordes in Swaziland where you were brought up because they were being chased by.
They weren't being chased by anyone. They were being dispersed by the British Army who had opened fire on them. Yeah.
Okay, dangerous. And how often would that? When was that a regular thing? Was that a yearly thing?
No, it wasn't a regular thing. It didn't happen a lot. And that period, once the army arrived and they suppressed the uprising, which, as I say, in our area wasn't such a big deal as it was in other places in Africa. Everything kind of calmed down. But there was a really hectic period of a few years, I'd say.
Okay. So do you think that part of your childhood had an impact into what you now do in the world?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's not only that period of violence that had an impact on my work now and my whole persona perhaps, but it's just that whole era of colonialism really, I think, that affected me, because the whole thing about that time from a European perspective was it was a time of real denial. There's a real denial of what was happening there, the subjugation of the native population, and the treatment of the native population, and also the violence as well. And there's a real denial of it. Like, for instance, when that happened, when I had been trampled by this crowd, I was just taken in, given a bath, and we had lunch. And there was no talk about it or anything. And there's this whole violent situation going on and this whole suppression. And what's being discussed or what's important is that you eat, that you carve the butter with the butter knife.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no addressing of what's really going on.
Well, how old would you have been when that happened?
Well, I was 5 or 6.
Trampling.
Well, I was 5 or 6 when that happened. And I saw a lot of things. Neighbors were murdered and all sorts of things. Saw a lot of things happening. But it wasn't just that. It's also just the general treatment of a race of people. You see. And being treated as if they're inhuman and animals, and because when you're a kid, your nanny, your cook, the African kids that you play with, they're just the most beautiful people, and you love them and that, and yet you see your elders treating them, very harshly, and treating them as another species and an inferior species and whatever. And so to me, who felt for these people, there was this denial not only of what's going on, but a denial of the heart and the hearts of others. And so I think that's the most. I don't think, maybe a psychologist or psychiatrist would inspect me and tell you differently, but I don't think I've really been affected by the violence or the horror or something. I mean, I think it's actually helped me, like growing up in a place where bucks walking along and the next thing it's dead, a leopard's killed. It's just life, and that's how the locals treated it as well. So I don't think I was traumatized by that, really, to be honest. The thing that affected me though is the denial, and I think how it affected
of your elders.
Yeah, of the elders, the whole colonial, because people that you were taught to respect, and that now looking back on it, and even by my elders' admission, the local district commission was an alcoholic and a pedophile, and they're scum, really, honestly, they're a real rabble, and yet you brought up going, these people here are the scum and a subspecies of humanity, and then these colonials, you got to call them uncle and look up to them and treat them with respect. They're the good people, And so...
Well, let me ask you another question then. Getting into your teenage years, say mid-teens, when we start questioning, we start looking at the world and forming our own views, did you ever then start talking with your parents or those around you about, the two different things you were seeing?
No, not at all. Because, there was no opportunity for that discussion. There was
Okay.
no invitation. You know, that's the whole thing. There was a conspiracy, you know, and maybe an unconscious conspiracy, but a
Yeah.
conspiracy nevertheless to hold the solid worldview down, you know. And it was ideological, and like all ideology, it's you know, its success is its simplicity, which is, you know, we're basically fighting communism here, and it's, you know, if we don't hold this together, and you know, the communists will win, and anyone who doesn't see it our way is a communist, and anyone who sees it our way is a good person, and people with long hair are communists. You know, it's just really simplistic, and so everything's locked down. And so, as what I was saying before, is how that affected me is the worldview I formed is people are deluded, you know, and people live in a delusion basically, and there's no. It's kind of like growing up feeling you're living in a lunatic asylum, where people don't have a grasp on reality, and although I then moved on and found people that had other realities, what I've come to learn is their reality can just be as deluded as the colonial reality, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's just as righteous as the colonial reality, because that colonial reality is a righteous reality. It was a righteous reality, and in Australia you can even have politically correct realities that are delusionary and righteous, you know, and so that I think that's the biggest effect on me is like this thing where my suspicion of the world is that it's deluded, basically.
Okay. It's an interesting summing up, isn't it? And it was fascinating for me to hear about your early childhood, because I don't know about any of you out there, but for me, I'd never really spoken to someone like William in a one-to-one conversation. That was such a different upbringing to mine.
We're a dying breed. You won't have a chance to speak to many of
Well,
us.
I have a doubt anyway. Okay, so then you actually stayed and you farmed for a while when you finished school? Your dad's farm?
Yeah, when I finished school,
Yeah.
I did hang around and did a bit of farming.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then did what? In your sort of early 20s? Did a bit of travel?
I did travel. I traveled to Israel and Europe, and I also went to work. And I grew up in Swaziland, and our neighbouring country was South Africa. Nearest city was Johannesburg. Went to Johannesburg, where friends of my father took me in and into the kind of the family business. We were kind of family to them, and they were a big firm of commodity traders. The world's changed, but in those days, when I was in my early 20s, oil, commodities, grains, wheats, you know, minerals were bought and sold by trading companies. There was no direct miners selling directly to smelters, or grain growers selling directly to cornflakes manufacturers. It was all done by middlemen that shipped everything around, and so it was that kind of operation. And I went to work there, where I learned the trading game, basically, commodity trading game.
And how long did you do that for? How many years?
Not too long. Long enough to do an apprenticeship. And when I moved to Australia,
At what age?
I was about 27, 28.
Okay.
And when I came to Australia, when I moved to Australia, I used that background to move in, because that sort of industry was, that sort of occupation was dying. And I used it nevertheless to move into financial markets and trading financial markets and money markets,
Okay.
which I then did for a few more years.
We'll take another break and we'll come back and find out more about how what you did in your career formed part of, I guess, the background of the Magician's Way and the character in there.
Great.
Back with you soon.